Every nation has its own weapon that perfectly fits the phrase, "necessity is the mother of invention." These weapons share common traits: easy to make, requiring minimal amounts of expensive materials like steel, or allowing the use of low-quality steel. They are also typically simple to use. However, one thing that sets the East apart is the creativity in developing fighting techniques for almost any object, complete with stances, moves, and rules. By the second half of the 20th century, Japan had mastered the art of copying Western industrial products and moved on to trade expansion, often offering highly innovative and competitive solutions in the US market. This despite the fact that not so long ago it seemed Japan would never recover from its devastating defeat in World War II. The American war machine had crushed the Japanese Empire, neither forgetting nor forgiving the sudden, devastating attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. During the war, when motivating American soldiers, the most common rallying cry was, "Remember Pearl Harbor," and they certainly did. Japan's subsequent trade expansion made Americans take a closer look at the land of the rising sun, its traditions, and its culture. Naturally, Hollywood seized on this interest, drawn to Japan's exotic arsenal of weapons and its impressive martial arts. While movies are a mediocre source of reliable information and often spread outright myths, stereotypes, and misconceptions, they play a huge role in shaping public perceptions of countries, events, objects, and ideas. In fact, movies often determine which ideas gain popularity. Without cinema, we might never have heard of the katana or today's subject, nunchaku or nunchucks. It's not the easiest word to remember, but something tells me more people could explain what nunchaku are than could describe a flail or a glaive. To be fair, the popularization of this Eastern weapon wasn't solely Hollywood's doing. Hong Kong films starring Bruce Lee, who wielded them with flair, also played a big role. The origins of nunchaku, like many items in the Japanese arsenal, remain unclear. Most likely, like the sai, they emerged sometime between the late Middle Ages and early modern era. They are closely tied to Okinawa. It's worth noting that Okinawa had strict bans on carrying weapons, which only fueled the creativity of local craftsmen. Another theory suggests that after Okinawa's Ryukyu kingdom fell under Japanese control in the 17th century, a destitute class of nobility emerged. They needed weapons too, and nunchaku became one of their solutions. In any case, the exact origins of this item remain unclear. Essentially, nunchaku are a simple impact weapon made up of two equal wooden sticks, about 30 centimeters long, connected by a flexible joint. Some say the length of the sticks matches the wielder's forearm, while the joint corresponds to the width of their fist. These are just rough guidelines though, and variations exist. For instance, Chinese versions of the weapon sometimes feature a joint, as long as the sticks themselves. Like most flexible jointed weapons, nunchaku were likely inspired by flails used for threshing grain, in this case, rice. Another theory links their origins to parts of horse harnesses. While modern versions of nunchaku can be made from metal and connected by chains, historically, they were made from wood and cord. After all, we live in a time when an average salary can buy a ton of steel or more. In the past, even feudal lords couldn't afford such luxury, and peasants didn't even know what a salary was, let alone have money to spend. This wasn't unique to Asia. Anywhere resources could be conserved, people avoided using metal in weapons. For nunchaku, steel was never essential. Though their appearance might remind you of flails or morning stars, in my opinion, they're an evolution of the oldest weapon, the humble club. Essentially, a club sawed into two parts and connected with a flexible joint. This simple modification brought several advantages, the first being portability. When transported, nunchaku's length equals the rod's length, about 30 centimeters. However, in combat, the total length, including the rods and cord, stretches to around 70 or 80 centimeters. This makes them compact, yet capable of delivering strikes from a decent distance. Naturally, they can also be concealed under clothing. Another advantage is the flexible connection itself. It allows the striking part to achieve high speeds, while ignoring recoil during impact, but it also excludes the possibility of parrying with a weapon. Mastering nunchaku takes time. At first, it seems like fighting with these things is incredibly complicated, but in reality, most techniques boil down to basic spins and catches. Even a strike is essentially just part of a spin. The moves themselves aren't that hard to learn. What's tricky is developing coordination and achieving the speed needed for those spins and catches. These motions are where the weapon's main advantage lies. Unpredictability. It's tough for an opponent to figure out where the next attack will come from. But let's not idealize things. Keep in mind that both Europe and Asia had weapons like flails and maces, which often featured spherical, oval, or pear-shaped metal heads. An exception to this would be the large two-handed flails used by peasants, which often had heavy wooden striking parts. For flexible weapons to be truly effective, they need a compact striking head made of a dense material. This allows for maximum energy transfer over a smaller contact area, which increases impact and helps penetrate an opponent's defenses. With Nunchaku, the striking part is a long rod, meaning the contact area is relatively large. This makes them ineffective against opponents with any kind of protective gear. Even if the rods are made of metal and have decent weight, their larger contact area reduces the damage compared to a compact spherical head. On the other hand, the larger contact area of Nunchaku gives them a strong stopping effect. Strikes cause significant pain. Articles about Nunchaku often claim they can inflict serious injuries or even break skulls. I won't argue with that, but overall, Nunchaku are more of a non-lethal weapon with solid stopping power. Today, they're a traditional part of many Eastern martial arts, and some enthusiasts insist that they can easily take on an opponent armed with a sword or spear. That's a bit hard to believe. Even if the rods are steel and the connection is a chain, the wielder's hand is unprotected. The idea that the opponent's blade will conveniently hit the chain instead of the hand is as likely as taking a direct hit to the unprotected wrist. The only semi-viable way to block with Nunchaku is by aligning one of the rods along your forearm. With flails, this issue was resolved by equipping the fighter with a shield. Two-handed flails offered the advantage of longer striking distance. For someone armed with Nunchaku, the best chance is to quickly strike at the opponent's hands to disarm them. Overall, Nunchaku are mainly designed for dealing with one or several unarmed opponents, or those wielding short weapons like knives, daggers, clubs, or brass knuckles. This isn't battlefield gear, it's a weapon for urban or street confrontations. At the same time, flails came in many forms. Some were purely defensive tools, consisting of a small weight, not necessarily metal, attached to a cord. But more often, they were built with a separate handle, cord, or chain, and a metal striking head weighing a few hundred grams. While flail didn't allow for flashy spins and tricks like Nunchaku, they packed far greater destructive power and were true battlefield weapons. As mentioned earlier, a spherical, oval, or pear-shaped metal weight transferred energy to the target much more efficiently. A head weighing under 100 grams was often enough to inflict serious injuries and break bones. Additionally, due to their compact striking head and longer flexible connection compared to Nunchaku, flails were harder to block with a blade. They were also more effective against shielded opponents. In short, these two weapons had entirely different use cases and objectives. Nunchaku are better suited for self-defense or street fights, primarily aiming to immobilize or injure rather than kill. A flail, by contrast, is a less elegant but more lethal weapon, with strikes that are far more likely to stop an opponent permanently. In closing, it's worth noting that both Nunchaku and flails are classified as melee weapons, and owning or carrying them can lead to legal trouble.